I need to tell you something that might sting a little, but I promise you, it comes from a place of deep care. Right now, as you're listening to my voice, there are invisible chains wrapped around your mind. You can't see them. You might not even feel them. But they're there, and they're the reason you keep ending up in the same place financially. No matter how hard you work, no matter how many hours you put in, no matter how desperately you want things to change. I spent decades of my life studying human nature, and I discovered something that changed everything for me. The reason most people stay broke isn't because they're lazy. It's not because they lack opportunity. It's not even because they don't work hard enough. It's because they're running mental software that was programmed by people who were also broke. They're operating with a mind that was designed to keep them exactly where they are. Let me be blunt with you. Your broke friends gave you money advice. Your broke parents taught you what to believe about wealth. Your broke teachers showed you what to value. And now, you're surprised that you're broke too? That's not how it works. You can't download poverty programming and expect prosperity results. It's like trying to run the latest software on a computer from 1985. The system just wasn't built for it. Here's what nobody wants to admit. Every single day, your mind is either working for you or against you. And for most people, their mind is their biggest enemy. It's whispering lies about what's possible. It's replaying old fears. It's keeping them small. And the cruelest part? They don't even know it's happening. I'm going to share something with you today that took me 40 years to fully understand. Something I wish someone had sat me down and explained when I was young and struggling. If you can grasp what I'm about to tell you, if you can really let it sink into your bones, you won't just change your bank account. You'll change your entire life. But I have to warn you, this isn't going to be comfortable. Growth never is. You're going to have to look at some things about yourself that you've been avoiding. You're going to have to admit some hard truths. But on the other side of that discomfort, freedom. Real, genuine, life-altering freedom. So let me ask you something, and I want you to be honest with yourself. When was the last time you actually examined what you believe about money? Not what you say you believe, not what you wish you believed, but what you actually, truly believe deep down in the quiet moments when nobody's watching. Because those beliefs, those hidden programs running in the background of your mind, they're writing your financial story right now, every single day. And until you reprogram them, nothing changes. Nothing. Let me tell you why I'm so passionate about this. Why I'm taking the time to share this with you today. It's because I've seen too many brilliant, hardworking, talented people waste their entire lives being broke. Not because they weren't capable, but because nobody ever taught them that their mind could be their greatest asset or their greatest liability. They spent decades working on their circumstances when they should have been working on their consciousness. Your mind is the most powerful tool you'll ever own. But here's the problem. Most people are trying to build wealth with a mind that was trained for poverty. They're trying to create abundance with thoughts programmed for scarcity. They're trying to win a game they don't even understand they're playing. And the saddest part? They'll blame everything else. The economy, their boss, their background, their education, their luck. Everything except the one thing they have complete control over. Their mind. I'm not here to give you some get-rich-quick scheme. I'm not here to sell you false hope or empty promises. I'm here to tell you the truth. The kind of truth that might make you uncomfortable at first, but will set you free if you let it. The truth is this. You have been lied to about money your entire life. And those lies have been so deeply embedded in your consciousness that you defend them, you protect them, you live by them, even though they're destroying you. So if you're ready, if you're truly ready to break free from the mental prison that's been keeping you broke, then stay with me. Because what I'm about to share with you isn't theory. It's not philosophy. It's not some abstract concept. It's practical, proven wisdom that I've spent my entire life refining. And it works. But only if you're brave enough to use it. Let me start by making you a promise. If you give me your attention for the next hour, if you really listen, not just with your ears but with your heart and mind, I will show you exactly how to reprogram your mind for wealth. I'll show you the specific beliefs that keep people broke. I'll show you how to identify them in yourself. And most importantly, I'll show you how to replace them with beliefs that create prosperity. But here's what I need from you. I need you to be willing to question everything you think you know. I need you to be willing to admit that maybe, just maybe, the way you've been thinking about money has been wrong. I need you to be open to the possibility that you've been your own biggest obstacle all along. Because here's what I've learned after all these years. You can give someone all the money in the world, but if their mind isn't right, they'll lose it. You've seen it happen. Lottery winners are going broke, inheritance squanderers, people who get everything handed to them and still end up with nothing. That's not bad luck. That's bad programming. On the flip side, you can take everything away from someone with the right mindset, and they'll build it all back. And then some. That's not good luck. That's good programming. So the question isn't, how do I get more money? The question is, how do I become the kind of person who naturally attracts, keeps, and multiplies money? And that, my friend, is entirely about what's happening between your ears. Your brain is like a garden. Right now, for most people, that garden is overrun with weeds. Weeds of doubt, weeds of fear, weeds of limiting beliefs. And they wonder why nothing good grows there. You can't plant seeds of prosperity in soil contaminated with poverty consciousness. It won't work. The weeds will choke out everything good before it has a chance to take root. What we're going to do today is pull out those weeds, every single one. And then we're going to plant new seeds. Seeds that will actually grow into the life you've been dreaming about. But I'll be honest with you, pulling weeds isn't fun. It's dirty work. It requires effort. It requires you to get your hands in the soil and deal with stuff you've been ignoring for years, maybe decades. Are you ready for that? Because if you're not, you can stop right here. Go back to doing what you've always done, getting what you've always gotten. No judgment. Some people aren't ready for change, and that's okay. But if you are ready, if you're tired of being broke, tired of struggling, tired of watching everyone else seem to figure it out while you're stuck in the same place, then let's do this. Let's reprogram your mind. Let's break the chains. Let's set you free. Because you deserve better than this. You deserve to live in abundance. You deserve to have financial peace. You deserve to stop worrying about money and start enjoying your life. But wanting it isn't enough. Wishing for it isn't enough. You have to be willing to do the internal work that makes external change possible. And that work starts right now with understanding something crucial. Something that will change everything once you really get it. Your current financial situation is not happening to you. It's happening because of you, because of your beliefs, because of your thoughts, because of your mental programming. And the beautiful, liberating truth is this: if you created it, you can change it. So take a deep breath, open your mind, and let's begin the most important journey you'll ever take. The journey from broke to abundant, from stuck to free, from unconscious to aware. It all starts in your mind. It always has. Let me show you how. Now, I want you to understand something fundamental about how wealth actually works. Because if you don't get this, nothing else I tell you will matter. Wealth is not primarily about what you do. It's about who you are. It's about how you think. It's about what you believe is possible and what you believe you deserve. I've met thousands of people in my lifetime. Rich people, poor people, and everything in between. And you know what I've discovered? The difference between them isn't talent. It's not intelligence. It's not even opportunity, though that plays a role. The difference is internal. It's mental. It's the stories they tell themselves about who they are and what they're capable of. Let me give you an example. I once knew two young men who started with almost identical circumstances. Same town, similar families, similar education, both hardworking, both intelligent. Fast forward 30 years. One is wealthy beyond measure. The other is still struggling, paycheck to paycheck, wondering what went wrong. What was the difference? The first man believed, truly believed deep in his soul, that prosperity was his birthright. He saw opportunities everywhere. When he failed, he learned. When he succeeded, he grew. His mind was programmed for expansion. The second man, despite his hard work and good intentions, believed that wealth was for other people. Luckier people who were born into the right families, people who had connections. His mind was programmed for limitation. Same circumstances, different programming, different results. That's the power of the mind. Here's what I need you to understand. Your mind is not neutral. It's not just sitting there passively observing your life. Your mind is actively creating your reality every single moment of every single day. The thoughts you think, the beliefs you hold, the stories you tell yourself, they're not just mental exercises, they're instructions. They're blueprints. They're commands that your subconscious mind follows with absolute precision. If you believe you're destined to struggle, your mind will find ways to make you struggle. If you believe money is evil, your mind will sabotage every opportunity to make money. If you believe rich people are greedy and bad, your mind will prevent you from becoming rich because you don't want to be greedy and bad. It's that simple and that devastating. Your subconscious mind doesn't judge whether your beliefs are true or false, helpful or harmful. It just executes them. It's like a faithful servant who follows orders without question. If you tell it you're broke and always will be, it says, "Yes, sir, I'll make sure that happens." If you tell it you're abundant and prosperity flows to you easily, it says, "Yes, sir, I'll make sure that happens." So the question becomes, what are you telling your subconscious mind? What orders are you giving it? Because I promise you, it's listening, and it's obeying. And your bank account is showing you exactly what messages you've been sending. Most people don't realize they're doing this. They think their thoughts are just random mental noise that doesn't mean anything, but nothing could be further from the truth. Your thoughts are powerful. They're creative. They're magnetic. They're shaping your reality, whether you believe it or not. I spent years studying this. Years, experimenting with my own mind, testing what worked and what didn't. And what I discovered changed my life completely. I discovered that by changing my thoughts, I could change my circumstances. By reprogramming my beliefs, I could reprogram my reality. It wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. It was understanding how the mind works and using that understanding deliberately. Think about it this way. If you grew up hearing that money doesn't grow on trees, that you have to work hard for every penny, that rich people are corrupt, that there's never enough to go around, what happened? Those statements became beliefs. Those beliefs became thoughts. Those thoughts became actions. Those actions became results. And those results reinforced the original beliefs, creating a cycle that's almost impossible to break unless you know how. This is what I call the poverty loop. Limiting belief creates limiting thoughts. Limiting thoughts create limiting actions. Limiting actions creates limiting results. Limiting results reinforces limiting beliefs. Round and round it goes, year after year, generation after generation. People are trapped in the same financial patterns as their parents and grandparents, not because it's destiny, but because it's programming. But here's the beautiful thing. Once you see the loop, once you understand how it works, you can break it. You can step out of it. You can choose different beliefs, which create different thoughts, which create different actions, which create different results. And those new results will reinforce your new beliefs, creating an abundance loop instead. Empowering belief creates expansive thoughts. Expansive thoughts create bold actions. Bold actions create abundant results. Abundant results reinforce empowering beliefs. This is how wealth is built. Not just financial wealth, but wealth in every area of life. This is how you go from broke to prosperous. By changing what's happening in your mind first. Now I know what. You're thinking, Benjamin, that's all well and good, but I've got real bills to pay. I can't just sit around visualizing money while my landlord's knocking on my door. I hear you, and you're absolutely right to be practical. But here's what most people miss. Changing your mental state doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means times changing times your reality by first changing how you times perceive times it. When I was deep in debt in my 20s, I didn't just pretend everything was fine. I faced the numbers head on. But instead of letting those numbers paralyze me with fear, I asked myself a different question. What would a wealthy person do in this situation? A poor person looks at debt and feels shame. They hide from creditors. They stop opening mail. They let anxiety consume them until they can't think straight. A wealthy person looks at the same debt and sees it as a problem to be solved. They make a list. They prioritize. They communicate. They create a plan. Same debt, completely different mental approach, completely different outcome. This is what I mean by mindset determining wealth. Your external circumstances might be identical to someone else's, but your internal response is what creates your future. Let me give you another example. Two people lost their jobs on the same day. Same industry, same severance package, same savings in the bank. One person spirals into depression, binge watches television for 3 months, and eventually takes the first low-paying job they can find out of desperation. The other person takes one day to feel their feelings, then gets to work. They update their resume. They reach out to their network. They learn a new skill. They explore opportunities they never considered before. 6 months later, they're in a better position than they were before they got laid off. What was the difference? Not their circumstances, not their resources, their mindset, their mental programming about what setbacks mean and how to respond to them. You see, when your child faces rejection, whether it's not making the team, losing the election, or watching their business idea flop, your reaction in that moment programs their future. Not what you say 6 months later in some calm, reflective conversation, but what you do in the raw, immediate aftermath. Most parents panic. They see their child's pain, and they can't help themselves. They rush in with reassurance that sounds supportive, but actually plants seeds of fragility. It's okay. You're still special. Those judges don't know what they're talking about. That teacher has always been unfair to you. Every one of these statements teaches the child to externalize failure, to see themselves as victims of circumstances beyond their control. I learned this the hard way with my own grandson, Temple. Brilliant boy, absolutely brilliant. Failed his entrance examination to the academy twice. And the first time, I made every mistake in the book. I told him the test was poorly designed. I suggested the examiners were biased. I built him an entire scaffold of excuses because I couldn't bear to see him feel inadequate. You know what happened? He failed again. Because I'd taught him that failure was something that happened to him, not something he could control through his own effort and strategy. The second time, I changed my approach entirely. I sat him down and I said something that felt brutal in the moment. Temple, you failed because you weren't prepared. Not because the test was unfair. Not because you're not smart enough. But because you didn't do the work required to master that material. So the only question that matters is, what are you going to do differently? Here's where most people lie to themselves. They say, I'll try harder next time. But trying harder to do the wrong things times is like rowing harder in the wrong direction. You just get to the wrong destination faster. Let me tell you what actually changes the game. It's not motivation. It's not willpower. It's not some magical study hack. It's something far more fundamental. You need to understand how learning actually works in your brain. Your brain is not a hard drive. You can't just download information and expect it to stay there. Your brain is more like a garden. And just like a garden, if you don't tend to it properly, weeds grow and the good stuff dies. When you learn something new, your brain creates neural pathways. Think of them as little trails through a forest. The first time you walk that trail, it's hard. The branches scratch you, you trip over roots, you get lost. But every time you walk that same trail, it gets a little clearer, a little easier. Eventually, it becomes a well-worn path you can walk without even thinking. That's what mastery is. That's what understanding is. It's not about cramming information into your skull the night before. It's about walking that trail over and over until your feet know the way in the dark. But here's what you're actually doing. You're walking the trail once, maybe twice, and then expecting to sprint down it at full speed during the exam. And when you can't, when you stumble and fall, you blame yourself for being stupid. You're not stupid. You just never built the path. I watch students do this every single day. They read a chapter once. They nod along in the lecture. They think, yeah, I get it. But getting it in the moment is not the same as knowing it times when it matters. Getting it is recognition. Knowing it is a recall. And there's a universe of difference between the two. Now, let me share something that took me years to understand. The human mind, your mind, has what I call cue dependency. It means your memory doesn't work like a filing cabinet where you simply reach in and pull out what you need. No, it works more like a locked door, and you need the right key to open it. I discovered this principle through my experiments with self-improvement. I would write down proverbs, maxims, and philosophical ideas in my commonplace book. I'd read them, nod my head, think, yes, this is brilliant. And then, nothing. A week later, when I actually needed that wisdom, it had vanished like morning fog. The problem wasn't that I'd forgotten. The information was still in there, locked away. The problem was that I had no key to retrieve it. I'd learned the information in one context, sitting quietly in my study, but I needed it in another context entirely, in the middle of a heated negotiation with the British Parliament, or while drafting a critical document under deadline pressure. Here's what most people don't realize. Every time you study something, Your brain is recording not just the information, but also the context, the room you're in, the feeling in your body, your emotional state, the specific way the information was presented to you. All of this becomes woven into the memory itself. So when you highlight a passage in your book, you're creating a memory that's tied to the act of highlighting. When you need that information later, your brain searches for the cue, and the cue it finds is the feeling of holding a highlighter while reading. Unless you're planning to bring your highlighter to every important moment in your life, you're creating a memory you'll never be able to access when you truly need it. This is why students who study by rereading their notes perform so poorly on actual exams. They've created memories that are cued by the experience of looking at my notes in my dorm room. But the exam happens in a testing center, under stress, without notes. Different context entirely. The key doesn't fit the lock. So what's the solution? How did I actually make a memory stick? I used what I now know as times context independent encoding asterisk. I didn't just study the information, I times transformed times it. I rewrote concepts in my own words. I explained them aloud as if teaching an imaginary student. I drew diagrams from memory, then checked them. I created questions and answered them without looking. Each time I did this, I was building multiple retrieval pathways. The memory wasn't tied to one place, one notebook, one set of notes. It existed independently, woven into my understanding itself. And here's something most people miss entirely. I studied in different locations, sometimes at my desk, sometimes in the library. Once, I took my materials outside and quizzed myself while walking. This felt chaotic at first, almost uncomfortable. But it was brilliant. Why? Because varying your environment forces your brain to encode the information more deeply. When you study the same material in multiple contexts, your brain learns that this information is important times regardless times of where you are. It becomes context independent, portable, accessible anywhere. The students who failed, they had location-dependent memories. Their knowledge was chained to their desk, their dorm room, their specific study spot. When they sat down in that unfamiliar exam hall, their memories stayed behind. Mine came with me. Here's another mistake I see constantly. People treat reviews as optional. They learn something once and think, got it, moving on. Then they're shocked when they can't remember it a week later. I'll tell you what I learned through painful trial. Memory is not a light switch. It's not on or off. It's a pathway that needs to be walked repeatedly, or it disappears beneath the underbrush. The difference between students who remember and students who forget isn't talent. It's not intelligence. It's repetition, but times strategic times repetition. I used something that would later be called time-spaced repetition asterisk, though I didn't have a fancy name for it back then. I simply noticed that if I reviewed material at increasing intervals, first after 1 day, then 3 days, then a week, it stuck. Each review was easier, faster, and more automatic. I kept a small journal where I'd mark which ideas needed revisiting. Not everything, just the concepts I truly wanted to master. The ones that mattered to my work, my writing, my experiments. I treated my mind like I treated my printing press. Consistent maintenance prevented breakdown. Here's what surprised me most about this method: it didn't feel like studying. After the first few reviews, recalling information became almost effortless. The knowledge felt time-zoned asterisk, not rented. When I sat down to write an essay or engage in debate, the right words, the right arguments, they surfaced naturally. I didn't have to dig for them. Compare that to my younger self, frantically rereading the night before I needed to use something. That knowledge evaporated like morning dew. It never belonged to me. It was temporary occupancy at best. The principle applies beyond books and learning too. I use the same approach with skills. When I worked to improve my writing, I didn't write one essay and call myself polished. I wrote daily. Then I'd return to pieces I'd written weeks earlier, rewrite them, and see what I'd do differently. Each return taught me something new about rhythm, about persuasion, about clarity. When I practiced swimming, yes, I loved swimming, taught myself new strokes just for the joy of it. I didn't master a technique in one afternoon. I'd practice a movement, leave it alone, and come back days later. My body remembered better after rest than after exhaustion. The pattern held everywhere. Spacing created strength, cramming created an illusion. Now, let me be direct with you, because I sense you're wondering about the application. You're thinking, Ben, this sounds lovely, but I have deadlines. I have exams. I have presentations next week. I can't space things out over months. I understand that urgency, truly. But here's my question back to you. How many times have you crammed for something, passed it, then couldn't remember a single detail 2 months later? How many books have you read, courses you've taken, certifications you've earned that left almost no trace in your actual capabilities? If your answer is many, then perhaps urgency has been your enemy, not your friend. The real tragedy isn't failing a test. It's spending thousands of hours of your life learning things you'll forget. You see, we've been conditioned to believe that speed equals intelligence. The fastest hand in the air. The quickest answer on the quiz. The student who finishes first and walks confidently to turn in their exam while you're still on page 2. But here's what nobody tells you. That student often isn't smarter. They're just more willing to guess. I learned this in the most embarrassing way possible. Sophomore year, AP Chemistry. There was this guy named Derek who would finish every test in half the time it took me. I mean, we'd have 50 minutes, and he'd be done in 25. Every single time. I convinced myself he was a genius, that his brain just operated on a different frequency. So, I tried to keep up. I started rushing through my own exams, barely reading the questions, picking answers based on instinct rather than understanding. My grade dropped from an A to a C in 3 weeks. Meanwhile, Derek was pulling B's and C's himself. He wasn't a genius, he was just impatient. And I had destroyed my own grade, trying to match his dysfunction. The girl who actually aced that class? Sarah. She used every minute of every test. Sometimes, she'd ask for extra time. She wrote slowly, checked her work twice, and didn't care who left before her. She understood something crucial. The only race that matters is the one against forgetting. Because here's the disturbing truth about cramming. Even when it works, it fails you later. You might pass that test on Friday, but what happens in 3 months when that material shows up again? What happens when next year's class assumes you remember this year's foundation? You're standing on sand instead of concrete. I saw this constantly with calculus students. They'd cram through Calc 1, barely pass, then hit Calc 2 like a brick wall. Not because Calc 2 was impossibly harder, but because they never actually learned Calc 1. They rented the knowledge for one test, then got evicted. And the nightmare compounds. Now they're trying to learn new material while simultaneously relearning old material, all while pretending they understand concepts they never grasped in the first place. It's like trying to build the second floor of a house while the first floor is still missing walls. The exhaustion isn't just physical, it's existential. You're trapped in an endless cycle of forgetting and relearning, running faster and faster just to stay in the same place. And perhaps the cruelest irony? The people around you often don't see the struggle. They see someone who's smart or talented, but just not living up to their potential. They see the glimpses of brilliance when you're in the zone, when everything clicks, and they wonder why you can't just do that all the time. They don't see the scaffolding required to reach those moments, the elaborate systems, the constant vigilance, the mental energy expenditure that would exhaust anyone. I remember a conversation with a colleague who told me, "You're so creative and innovative when you're engaged. Why can't you just apply that same energy to the boring stuff?" And I wanted to explain that it's not about wanting to, it's about the fundamental architecture of my brain. It's like asking someone why they can't just see better without their glasses. The innovation isn't a choice I'm making. It's a compensation mechanism, a way my brain routes around its own obstacles. The truth is, ADHD makes you intimate with a particular species of grief, the grief of knowing who you could be if your brain worked just slightly differently. You catch these glimpses of your potential self, the one who remembers appointments and finishes projects and doesn't lose 3 hours to Wikipedia rabbit holes about Byzantine architecture when you're supposed to be writing a report. That person feels so close, just on the other side of a thin membrane, yet completely unreachable. And society's narrative about ADHD doesn't help. We're told it's a superpower by some, a gift that makes us creative and entrepreneurial. And yes, there are advantages, the ability to hyperfocus, the associative thinking, the willingness to challenge conventional approaches, but calling it purely a gift dismisses the daily struggle, the real disability aspects that make ordinary life extraordinarily difficult. The truth is more nuanced, more human. ADHD is both a challenge and a capability, a limitation and liberation, depending entirely on the context you find yourself in. In a structured classroom where you must sit still for hours absorbing information delivered at someone else's pace, it's absolutely disabling. In a crisis requiring rapid decision-making and unconventional thinking, it might be exactly what's needed. The problem is that our society is built almost entirely around the former, not the latter. We've constructed a world that demands sustained attention to boring tasks, that punishes spontaneity, that requires extensive administrative competence just to survive. School systems that reward compliance over curiosity. Workplaces with endless meetings and bureaucratic procedures. Healthcare systems where getting treatment requires navigating a labyrinth of appointments, forms, and prescription refills. Every single one of these systems was designed without considering brains like ours. And then we're told we're the ones who are broken. I think constantly about what society would look like if it had been designed by people with ADHD. Would we have 40-hour work weeks of sustained focus? Or would we have acknowledged that human attention naturally ebbs and flows? Would we force children to sit motionless at desks for 6 hours? Or would we have built education around movement and exploration? Would we make people jump through 17 administrative hoops to access healthcare? Or would we have streamlined everything to its essential components? These aren't just hypothetical questions. They reveal how much of what we call disability is actually just poor design, a mismatch between brain and environment. This is what's known as the social model of disability, and it fundamentally changes how we understand ADHD. Yes, there are real neurological differences. Yes, there are genuine impairments in certain executive functions, but the degree to which these differences become disabling depends enormously on the environment. A person who struggles with sustained attention isn't disabled when doing varied, engaging work. They're disabled when forced into roles requiring hours of monotonous focus. A person with poor working memory isn't disabled when systems provide external supports. They're disabled when expected to remember everything unaided. This brings us to something I've been thinking about quite a bit lately, the idea of universal design. And no, I'm not just talking about wheelchair ramps, though those are certainly part of it. Universal design is based on a radical premise. When you design for disability, you often end up creating something better for everyone. Those curb cuts? Sure, they're essential for wheelchair users. But they're also used by parents with strollers, travelers with rolling luggage, delivery workers with hand trucks, and elderly folks who find steps challenging. The closed captions you see on videos? Critical for deaf viewers, but also used by people in noisy coffee shops, language learners, anyone who processes information better by reading, and folks watching videos on mute during their lunch break at work. Voice-to-text technology was developed for people who couldn't type. Now millions use it while driving, cooking, or simply because it's faster than thumbs on a tiny keyboard. Audiobooks were initially created for blind readers. Today, they're a multi-billion-dollar industry, used by commuters, people with dyslexia, multitaskers, and anyone who prefers listening to reading. You see the pattern? When we accommodate what we consider disability, we often create innovations that everyone benefits from. The curb cut effect, they call it. One group's necessity becomes everyone's convenience. But here's where it gets really interesting, and where most people miss the point entirely. The reason these accommodations help everyone isn't because disabled people are fundamentally different from non-disabled people. It's because the line between disabled and non-disabled is far blurrier than we pretend. Think about it. Do you use reading glasses? Congratulations! You're using an assistive device to compensate for a sensory impairment. Do you take medication for blood pressure, thyroid, or diabetes? You're managing a chronic health condition. Do you need coffee to function in the morning? That's pharmacological cognitive enhancement, friend. You can't walk 5 miles without discomfort? Limited mobility. The difference between someone who's considered disabled and someone who's not often comes down to whether their needs fall within what society has decided to accommodate as normal. Need glasses? No problem, that's normalized. Need a wheelchair? Now you're disabled. Need medication for a physical condition? That's healthcare. Need medication for a mental condition? Now you're dealing with stigma. Need medication for a mental condition? Now you're dealing with stigma. Need addiction treatment? Now you're treated like a criminal instead of someone with a disease. Need reproductive health care? Now you're navigating a political minefield where your body has become a battleground for other people's beliefs. The system doesn't just deny you care. It humiliates you in the process. It makes you prove you're suffering enough to deserve help. It makes you justify your pain to strangers who view you as a line item, a liability, a potential loss on a spreadsheet. I watch people ration insulin because they can't afford the full dose. I watch diabetics calculating whether they can make it another week before refilling their prescription. Making a medical decision based not on what their body needs, but on what their bank account can handle. That's not healthcare. That's Russian roulette with your pancreas. I see cancer patients choosing between the treatment that might save their life and the home they've lived in for 30 years. Because you can't have both. The math doesn't work. You can survive the cancer and lose everything else, or you can keep your home and hope the tumor is merciful. What kind of choice is that? I watch elderly folks cutting pills in half to make them last longer, taking medication every other day instead of daily. Not because a doctor recommended it, because their fixed income doesn't stretch far enough to cover food and medicine in the same month, so they choose. And every choice is a betrayal of something essential. I see parents lying awake at 3 in the morning, listening to their child cough, trying to decide if it's bad enough to warrant an emergency room visit, doing triage in their heads, running cost-benefit analyses while their kid struggles to breathe. Because that ER visit isn't just expensive, it's potentially financially catastrophic. And if they guess wrong, if they wait too late, they'll spend the rest of their lives wondering if their fear of medical bills killed their child. That's the psychological torture this system inflicts. It doesn't just damage bodies. It scars minds. It creates trauma around the very act of seeking care. People develop anxiety about going to the doctor, not because they fear the diagnosis, because they fear the bill. I've watched families make calculations no family should have to make. Do we take grandma to the emergency room for her chest pains, or do we wait and see if they pass? Do we fill this prescription or pay the electric bill? Do we schedule the follow-up appointment the doctor recommended, or do we just hope? These aren't medical decisions. They're financial decisions masquerading as medical ones. And the cruelest part? The system punishes prevention. A young woman skips her annual checkup because she can't afford the copay. 3 years later, she's diagnosed with cervical cancer that could have been caught early. Now she faces not just a devastating illness, but devastating debt. The system that made prevention unaffordable will now charge her hundreds of thousands for treatment that might have been unnecessary. A man with a family history of heart disease can't afford the cholesterol medication his doctor prescribed. He tries to manage it with diet and exercise, but without the medication, his condition worsens. Eventually, he has a heart attack. The emergency intervention costs 50 times what years of medication would have cost. But the medication required monthly payments he couldn't make. The heart attack? That debt he'll carry forever. This is the insanity we've normalized. We've created a system where the cheapest interventions are the least accessible, and the most expensive interventions are mandatory. Where an ounce of prevention costs more out of pocket than a pound of cure costs the insurance company. Where being poor doesn't just make you sicker, it makes healthcare more expensive for everyone. I designed a postal system that connected a nation. The principle was simple: universal access at reasonable cost creates universal benefit. A letter from Boston to Philadelphia cost the same whether you were a merchant or a farmer. The system worked because everyone could use it. Healthcare isn't a letter. I understand that. The costs are higher, the stakes more complex. But the principle remains. A system that prices out half the population isn't a system. It's a market failure dressed in a white coat. I've watched governments attempt to address this through subsidies and tax credits, financial band-aids on structural wounds. These help, certainly. A family receiving assistance to purchase insurance breathes easier than one without. But we're still operating within a fundamentally flawed framework, asking, how do we make this expensive system slightly more affordable? Rather than, why is the system this expensive to begin with? The pharmaceutical industry alone demonstrates the absurdity. A vial of insulin that costs $4 to manufacture sells for $300. The manufacturer justifies this through research and development costs, yet many of these drugs were developed with public funding. They're foundational research conducted in universities supported by taxpayer dollars. We're paying twice. Once for the discovery, again for the product. Patent protections, designed to encourage innovation, have been twisted into mechanisms for perpetual profit. Companies make minor modifications to existing drugs, changing the delivery mechanism, adjusting the formula slightly, and extend their monopolies another decade. Generic alternatives, which could reduce costs by 80 or 90%, remain locked away behind legal barriers constructed specifically to prevent competition. This isn't capitalism, it's feudalism with better marketing, and the complexity serves a purpose. The labyrinthine nature of medical billing, insurance networks, prior authorizations, and formularies isn't accidental. Confusion is profitable. When patients can't understand their bills, when doctors can't predict costs, when even insurance companies seem bewildered by their own systems, everyone simply pays what they're told. I knew merchants in Philadelphia who would have been horsewhipped in the street for such practices. We had laws against price gouging, against taking advantage of those in desperate circumstances. A baker who tripled his prices during a food shortage would find his business boycotted, his reputation destroyed. Yet in healthcare, this behavior is standard operating procedure, defended as necessary for system sustainability. But here's what troubles me most deeply. We've internalized these injustices. We accept them as inevitable, natural, unchangeable, the way people once accepted that diseases were divine punishment or that some humans were meant to own others. We've normalized a system so fundamentally unjust that questioning it seems radical. I watch young people graduate with degrees in fields we desperately need: education, social work, nursing, and environmental science, only to discover they cannot afford to live in the communities they serve. The teacher who shapes young minds takes on a second job. The nurse who saves lives shares a cramped apartment with 3 roommates. Meanwhile, someone who inherited wealth from their great-grandfather's railroad monopoly lectures them about financial responsibility. The cruelty is compounded by the mythology we've built around it. We tell people that poverty is a personal failing, that wealth is always earned, that the market rewards virtue and punishes laziness. These are comfortable lies that let us sleep at night while children go hungry in the richest nation in history. I think about the single mother working 2 jobs who gets lectured about bootstraps by someone whose family connections landed them a corner office. I think about the brilliant minds lost because genius doesn't flourish on an empty stomach or in the chaos of housing instability. I think about all the potential squandered, all the contributions never made, because we've decided that some people deserve security and others deserve only the opportunity to struggle. And perhaps most insidiously, we've created a system where those struggling blame themselves, where exhaustion is reframed as laziness, where systemic barriers are internalized as personal inadequacy, where people working themselves to death still feel guilty for not doing enough. We've turned economic violence into a referendum on individual character. The psychological toll is staggering. Studies show that financial stress has the same impact on cognitive function as losing an entire night's sleep. We're asking people to make their best decisions, to plan strategically, to invest in their futures, while their brains are operating in survival mode. Then we judge them for the predictable results. I've watched enough good people spiral not because they lack discipline, but because the system is designed with friction at every pressure point. Think about the architecture of poverty for a moment. If you're wealthy and you overdraft your account, your bank quietly covers it, maybe doesn't even charge you, because you're a valued customer. If you're poor and you overdraft by $20 buying groceries, that's a $35 fee. Then another fee when your next automatic payment bounces. Then another. I've seen a single financial stumble turn into a $300 crater in a matter of days. And here's what really gets me: the poorer you are, the more everything costs. You can't afford to buy in bulk, so you pay more per unit. You can't afford the upfront cost of quality items, so you buy cheap things that break and must be replaced repeatedly. There's a reason they call it the poor tax. Your neighborhood has fewer grocery stores, so food costs more. You don't have a car, so that affordable job in the suburbs costs you 3 hours and 2 bus transfers daily. The economist Sendhil Mullainathan calls this the bandwidth tax. Poverty consumes mental resources that could otherwise be used for planning, studying, or strategic thinking. I remember a young woman in Philadelphia who worked 40 hours weekly at minimum wage while taking night classes. She was doing everything right, according to the bootstrap mythology. Then her car broke down, needed a $400 repair. She didn't have $400. So she took out a payday loan at 400% interest. That loan became a trapdoor she fell through for the next 2 years. Her story isn't exceptional, it's the norm. Nearly half of Americans couldn't cover a $400 emergency without borrowing or selling something. The system isn't broken, it's working exactly as designed. It's working for someone, just not for you. Let me show you what I mean. When I ran my printing shop, I extended credit to customers. But here's the thing: I knew them. I knew their character, their circumstances, their ability to repay. The terms were transparent. No hidden clauses buried in microscopic print. No predatory rates that multiplied the debt faster than honest work could pay it down. Today's financial system operates on a fundamentally different principle. It profits most when you struggle. Think about that. Credit card companies don't make their real money from people who pay their balances in full each month. They make it from those who carry debt, who pay minimum payments while interest compounds like a slow-acting poison. The payday lending industry generates $11 billion annually, not by helping people, by trapping them. A 2-week loan at 400% annual interest isn't a helping hand. It's a noose disguised as a rope, and we've normalized this. We've accepted it as the cost of convenience, the price of living in modern times. But convenience for whom? A $400 loan that costs you $800 to repay isn't convenient. It's exploitation, with a smile and a storefront. Here's what really troubles me: the vocabulary shift. We don't call people poor anymore, we call them underserved. As if the problem is merely a service delivery issue, not a systemic extraction of wealth from those who have the least. Banks closed branches in low-income neighborhoods, calling it efficiency. Then, payday lenders opened in the same locations, charging the poor more for basic financial services than the wealthy pay for sophisticated investment management. The working poor now pay a premium for being poor. They pay more for check cashing, more for money orders, and more for every basic transaction that the middle class gets for free with a simple bank account. It's expensive to be broke in America, and the weight of it accumulates. Not just financially, but psychologically. The constant calculation, the mental gymnastics of juggling due dates, the shame of declining cards, the anxiety that hums in the background of every moment. Sarah eventually paid off that payday loan, but the cost wasn't just the money. It was the opportunities she missed while trapped in that cycle. She couldn't save. She couldn't invest in herself. She couldn't take risks that might have led somewhere better. She was running to stay still, exhausting herself just to remain in the same suffocating place. And here's what haunts me most. Sarah isn't lazy. She isn't financially irresponsible. She's caught in a system designed to keep her exactly where she is. The poverty tax isn't a conspiracy, it's the natural consequence of markets that extract maximum value from those with minimum resources. You see this everywhere once you start looking. The woman who can't afford a car, so she spends 3 hours on buses to get to work, losing time she could use to study or rest or be with her children. The family that can't afford bulk purchases at warehouse stores, so they pay more per unit at the corner bodega. The man who can't afford dental care, so a small cavity becomes an infection that costs him his job. Each disadvantage compounds. Each shortcut becomes a trap. The poor pay more for almost everything, and they pay not just in money, but in time, in health, in dignity, in opportunity. I think about compound interest often. It's one of the most powerful forces in finance. Einstein supposedly called it the eighth wonder of the world. Those who understand it earn it, those who don't pay it. But compound interest works in both directions. It can build wealth exponentially, or it can bury you deeper with each passing year. When you're poor, everything compounds against you. You pay compound interest on debt. You pay the compound cost of deferred maintenance on your car, your health, your home. You pay the compound price of stress that accumulates in your body, shortening your life expectancy. You lose the compound benefits of early investment, of education, of networks, and connections formed in spaces you can't afford to enter. Meanwhile, wealth compounds in the opposite direction. Assets appreciate, networks expand, opportunities multiply. The gap doesn't just grow, it accelerates. And here's what makes this particularly insidious. This acceleration is invisible to those falling behind. When you're struggling to make rent, you're not thinking about how your lack of professional connections is compounding. When you're working 2 jobs to survive, you don't see how your missing dinner parties with decision makers is costing you exponentially more than the hours you're trading for wages. The wealthy child whose parents host fundraisers doesn't recognize their advantage. They think everyone grows up meeting senators and venture capitalists in their living room. They mistake their network for merit, their access for aptitude. I've watched this blindness create a peculiar form of moral hazard. Those who benefit most from compounding advantages become convinced they've earned every bit through superior effort. The inheritance, whether financial or social, becomes invisible to them. They genuinely believe their success validates their character rather than their starting position. Meanwhile, the person born without these advantages must be not just good, but exceptional. Not just hardworking, but heroic. They must overcome every compounding disadvantage while competing against those for whom every system accelerates success. Consider the child born into poverty who becomes a doctor. Remarkable, we say. Inspirational. And it is. But what we're really celebrating is someone who succeeded despite a system designed to compound their disadvantages at every turn. We make heroes of those who overcome structural inequity rather than questioning why the structure exists at all. The truly wealthy understand something the struggling never learn. Success isn't about working harder. It's about positioning yourself where compounding forces work in your favor rather than against you. This is why my advice about thrift and industry, while useful, was never the complete picture. Yes, save your pennies. Absolutely. Work diligently. But understand that these virtues alone cannot overcome the mathematics of compounding disadvantage. They're necessary, but insufficient. The game isn't simply to accumulate, it's to position yourself where accumulation accelerates. To build not just wealth, but systems that generate wealth. To create not just connections, but networks that create opportunities automatically. During the Stamp Act crisis, I watched gentlemen of means panic. They saw their paper wealth threatened by distant politicians, but I had positioned myself differently. I owned printing presses in multiple colonies, physical assets that produced daily cash flow regardless of Parliament's whims. I held property in Philadelphia whose value derived from the city's growth, not London's favor. I had partnerships in shipping, insurance, and trade that distributed my risk across industries and geographies. When the crisis passed, those who'd held only government bonds or single ventures were diminished. My diversified position had not only survived, it had strengthened, because a crisis always creates opportunity for those with resources to deploy. This is wealth positioning at its essence. Not merely owning things, but owning the right combination of things that hedge against different futures. Consider your own position with brutal honesty. If your primary income source vanished tomorrow, what would generate money? If your industry collapsed, what parallel skills transfer? If your currency devalued by half, what assets would hold value? Most people build their entire economic life on a single pillar. One job, one skill, one currency, one market. They call this focus. I call it fragility, disguised as dedication. True positioning requires multiple income streams that don't share common failure points. A salary from employment, revenue from a side venture, income from investments, perhaps royalties from intellectual property. Each stream should operate independently. When one weakens, others remain strong. I earned it as a printer, yes, but also as a postmaster, which gave me information advantages. As an inventor, though I rarely patented, it built my reputation. As a writer, I created influence. As a property owner, I generated passive returns. As a political figure, he opened doors to opportunity. Each identity reinforced the others, but none depended on the other's survival. This is not about working 5 jobs, it's about building 5 value generation systems that operate with minimal ongoing effort once established. The Philadelphia I helped build exemplifies this principle at the civic level. We didn't rely solely on port trade, though that was significant. We developed manufacturing, finance, publishing, education, and government functions. When any single sector struggled, the city's overall prosperity barely wavered. Diversification created resilience, and resilience attracted more investment, creating a reinforcing cycle. Your personal economy should mirror this model. Consider a farmer I knew who owned prime land near Philadelphia. Year after year, he planted only tobacco, the most profitable crop of his era. Why waste my land on corn or wheat when tobacco pays triple? He'd ask with a satisfied smile. For 5 years he was right. His income far exceeded his neighbor's modest returns. Then came the blight. Within 2 seasons, his entire fortune evaporated. The disease that ravaged tobacco ignored the diversified farms surrounding him, where wheat, corn, and vegetables continued thriving. While he faced ruin, his neighbors weathered the storm with barely diminished incomes. They couldn't buy luxuries that year, but they kept their land, fed their families, and maintained their dignity. The concentrated bet had looked brilliant until it didn't. I've watched this pattern repeat across generations and industries. The lawyer who only handles maritime cases prospers wildly during shipping booms, then starves when trade slows. The merchant who stocks exclusively imported silks celebrates when ships arrive regularly, then closes shop when war disrupts Atlantic crossings. The investor who pours everything into a single promising venture either becomes legendary or vanishes into obscurity, usually the latter. Concentration amplifies outcomes in both directions. You feel like a genius during the good times, which makes the inevitable reversal even more devastating psychologically. I've seen wealthy men reduced to poverty, not just financially, but spiritually, their entire identity wrapped up in being the man who made his fortune in insert single thing. When I structured my own affairs, I deliberately spread my interests across printing, publishing, real estate, inventions, and various partnerships. Not because I lacked confidence in any single venture, but because I understood that confidence and certainty are different things. I was confident in my printing business, yet I remained uncertain about fires, floods, changing tastes, competition, and the thousand unforeseen circumstances that influence any enterprise. This distinction matters enormously. Confidence says, "I've chosen well and worked hard." Certainty says, "Nothing can go wrong." The first is earned through effort and skill. The second is delusion, dressed as wisdom. Diversification acknowledges this reality without surrendering to it. You can be utterly confident in your primary income source while remaining realistic about life's inherent unpredictability. Consider the merchant ships that once sailed from Philadelphia's harbor. Each vessel carried promise, yet the ocean showed no favorites. A captain who entrusted his entire fortune to a single ship lived every moment between departure and return in silent terror. One storm, one miscalculation, one piece of rotten timber, and everything vanished beneath the waves. The wise merchants understood a different mathematics. They invested in multiple vessels, different routes, and varied cargo. Not because they doubted their judgment, they selected each captain with great care, but because they respected forces beyond their control. When one ship foundered, the others still sailed home. This wasn't pessimism. It was the profound optimism of someone who intended to remain in business for decades, not merely seasons. Your modern economy operates on precisely the same principles, merely faster. The variables have multiplied, the ocean has grown more turbulent, but the fundamental wisdom remains unchanged. A single income stream, no matter how robust it appears today, exists in an environment of constant transformation. I watch young people build their entire financial lives around one employer, one skill set, one industry. They speak of loyalty as if the economy reciprocates such sentiments. It does not. The economy is neither loyal nor disloyal, it simply evolves according to forces far larger than any individual company's good intentions. This reality shouldn't breed anxiety. It should breed intelligent preparation. The difference between fragility and resilience isn't in how much you earn, but in how many ways you can earn. 3 modest income streams create more security than one exceptional stream, because security isn't about magnitude, it's about redundancy. Think about the infrastructure of your own body. You have 2 kidneys, 2 lungs, backup systems layered throughout. Nature understood diversification long before economists named it. The principle appears everywhere survival matters. Multiple food sources for species. Multiple trade routes for civilizations. Multiple revenue streams for individuals who intend to weather whatever storms approach. The practical question becomes, how do you build this diversity without diluting your effectiveness? The answer lies in sequencing and synergy. You don't build 5 income streams simultaneously. You excel at one, then carefully construct a second that complements rather than competes with your time and attention. Then a third, each building on skills and relationships you've already developed. I've watched countless talented people sabotage themselves by spreading themselves too thin too soon. They launch a business while starting a side hustle while investing in real estate and building a YouTube channel. Within 6 months, they're doing 4 things poorly instead of 1 thing exceptionally. Smart diversification follows a pattern. Your primary income stream, your main business or career, should be producing reliably before you even consider a second stream. And that second stream should leverage what you've already built. If you're a skilled consultant, your second stream might be digital courses, teaching what you already teach clients. same expertise, different delivery method. Your third stream might be affiliate relationships with tools you already use and recommend. Notice the pattern? Each layer builds on the foundation beneath it. You're not learning entirely new skills for each venture. You're finding new applications for knowledge you've already mastered. The most profitable diversification I've seen uses what I call the skill stack multiplication approach. A woman I know became an expert in project management through her corporate job. Her second income stream was freelance project management for small businesses. Her third was creating templates and systems she'd already developed for herself. Her fourth was coaching others in her methodology. Her fifth was affiliate income from the software tools she used in all the previous streams. 5 income sources, all flowing from one core competency. That's strategic diversification. Compare that to someone who tries to do freelance writing, cryptocurrency trading, dropshipping, real estate wholesaling, and Amazon FBA simultaneously. 5 completely different skill sets, 5 different learning curves, 5 different sets of mistakes to make. It's not diversification, it's dilution. Your time and attention are finite resources. Every new venture you add creates not just direct time costs but cognitive load. You're tracking more moving pieces, managing more relationships, and solving more categories of problems. There's a real cost to context switching that most people underestimate. The entrepreneurs who build genuine financial resilience do it sequentially, not simultaneously. They become excellent at one thing until it's systematized enough to require less of their direct attention. Only then do they add the next layer. The difference between building wealth and staying busy is the difference between planting an orchard and picking wildflowers. One compound, the other doesn't. I've watched talented people exhaust themselves harvesting opportunities that looked promising in the moment but led nowhere. They'd spend 6 months building something, get distracted by the next shiny possibility, abandon the first project before it matured, and wonder why they never gained traction. Meanwhile, the person who seemed less talented but infinitely more patient would focus on one revenue stream until it became predictable. They'd spend a year, sometimes 2, making one thing work properly. They'd document their processes, train someone else to handle operations, and build systems that didn't require their constant intervention. Only after establishing that foundation would they consider expansion. This is why diversification is the reward for focus, not the substitute for it. Your first business teaches you how to build businesses. Your second business benefits from everything you learned in the first. Your third becomes easier still. But if you try to learn all 3 simultaneously, you learn nothing properly and build nothing that lasts. I remember a woman who ran a boutique consulting practice, just her, serving clients she genuinely enjoyed. For 3 years, people told her she needed to scale, to hire a team, to build an agency. She resisted. Instead, she perfected her positioning, raised her rates gradually, and became known for solving one specific problem exceptionally well. By year 4, she was working 20 hours weekly and earning more than most agency owners who manage teams of 10. Only then did she add a complementary service, not because she needed the income, but because her existing clients kept asking for it. She built the second offering using the same patient methodology as the first. That's what financial resilience actually looks like. It's not impressive from the outside. It doesn't make for exciting conference presentations. Nobody writes articles about the quiet sustainability of someone who built something modest and profitable and boring. But when markets shift, when platforms change their algorithms, when the economy contracts, these are the people who keep going. Not because they're lucky, but because they built foundations instead of facades. I'm watching this play out in real time. The people who treated their businesses like slot machines are now scrambling, rebranding, pivoting, trying to catch the next wave. Meanwhile, the ones who've been steadily compounding, they're just continuing. Same strategies, same principles, maybe tweaking around the edges, but fundamentally unchanged. There's a woman I know who runs a small subscription service for project management templates. Not sexy, not viral. She's been doing it for 8 years. Every month, she creates 3 new templates, answers customer questions, and occasionally writes a blog post. Her revenue has grown from $800 a month to $14,000 a month. Linear, predictable, sustainable. Compare that to the guy who launched 17 different passive income products in the same time frame, each one chasing whatever was trending. He made more money in his best month than she made in her best year. But over the 8 years, she's ahead by a factor of 3, and she sleeps well at night. This is what I mean about foundations versus facades. A facade looks impressive from the street. It photographs well, but the first strong wind reveals what it actually is: a prop, held up by wooden braces, with nothing behind it. Foundations are underground. Nobody sees them, nobody compliments them, nobody shares them on social media, but they're what allow you to build upward without collapsing. In business terms, foundations are things like actual customer relationships, not just email addresses you purchased. Real skills that compound, not just knowledge of a platform's current algorithm. Systems that work without you, built gradually over time, not shortcuts that require constant hustle to maintain. The most dangerous lie in modern business is that you can skip the foundation phase. That there's a hack, a secret, a method that lets you build the penthouse without building the ground floor first. Every building code on Earth requires a foundation proportional to the structure it must support. Try to cheat that requirement, and physics doesn't negotiate. The building doesn't just underperform, it collapses, usually taking people down with it. Your business follows the same immutable laws. The question isn't whether you'll build a foundation, but whether you'll build the right one before the weight becomes unbearable. I've watched entrepreneurs celebrate their first 100,000 in revenue while ignoring the fact that their systems can't handle 200,000. They're so focused on the vanity metric that they don't see the infrastructure groaning under the load. Then revenue doubles, and everything breaks. Customer service implodes, quality deteriorates. The founder burns out, and they wonder what went wrong, when the answer is brutally simple. They built a structure their foundation couldn't support. The moment to build your systems isn't when you're drowning. It's before the water rises. When you still have the bandwidth to think strategically rather than react desperately. Start with documentation. Not someday, not when you have time, but now. Every process you perform more than once deserves a written procedure. Every client interaction that repeats needs a template. Every question you answer repeatedly requires a standard operating procedure. This isn't busy work, it's the blueprint for your freedom. Most entrepreneurs resist this because it feels slow. They want to move fast, stay agile, and keep things flexible. But that's not agility, it's chaos with a marketing spin. Real agility comes from having clear systems you can modify and improve. Chaos just means you're making up everything on the fly and calling it innovation. I documented everything in my printing business. Not because I loved paperwork, but because I understood a principle most people miss. If it lives only in your head, it dies when you're unavailable. Your vacation becomes impossible. Your sick day becomes a crisis. Your business becomes a prison with you as both inmate and warden. Document your processes, and something remarkable happens. You create a trainable business. You create transferable value. You create the possibility of scale. Most importantly, you create the option to step back without everything collapsing. I learned this lesson watching master craftsmen in my printing days. The mediocre printer was always at his press, always inking, always setting type with his own hands. He was the business. The exceptional printer? He was teaching his apprentices his techniques, documenting his methods, creating systems that could run whether he was in the shop or negotiating a contract across town. The business that depends entirely on you isn't a business, it's a job you can never quit, never sell, never escape. Here's the uncomfortable question. If you disappeared for 3 months, would your business survive? Would it thrive? Or would it slowly suffocate without your constant presence? Your answer reveals whether you've built a business or simply created expensive self-employment. The trap is seductive because it feels productive. You're busy. You're needed. You're making things happen. Every day is full. Every hour is spoken for. You tell yourself you're building something, but what you're actually doing is running faster on a treadmill that never stops. I see entrepreneurs who've been building their business for 10 years, yet they're still answering every email, approving every decision, touching every transaction. They haven't built a business. They've built a prison with themselves, as both the warden and the inmate. The shift happens when you realize your job isn't to do the work, it's to build the systems that do the work. Your role isn't to be the best operator. It's to be the architect of operations that don't require you to operate. This means investing time now in documentation that saves time later. It means training people even when it's faster to do it yourself. It means creating processes that feel inefficient in the moment, but create efficiency at scale. I documented everything in my print shop. how to mix ink for different papers, how to set type for maximum clarity, how to price jobs for profit while remaining competitive. Other printers thought I was wasting time. But when I opened my second location, I didn't have to be in both places at once. The systems ran without me. Your knowledge trapped in your head is worthless to your business. Documented, systematized, and transferred to others, it becomes the infrastructure of scale. And this is where most entrepreneurs completely miss the opportunity. They finally document something, and they think the job is done. They put it in a folder somewhere. They add it to the Google Drive. Maybe they send it in a Slack message. And then they wonder why nothing changes. Documentation without implementation is just an expensive decoration. I learned this the hard way with our first operations manual. We spent weeks building this beautiful document. Every process is mapped out. Every workflow is detailed. Screenshots, videos, decision trees, the whole 9 yards. It was genuinely impressive. I was proud of it. And absolutely nothing changed in the business. Know why? Because nobody actually used it. It lived in a Google Doc that people opened once during onboarding and never looked at again. The document existed, but the behavior didn't change. The knowledge was captured, but not transferred. The system was written, but not lived. This is the phase that separates entrepreneurs who build real businesses from those who build elaborate hobbies with documentation. You need to build what I call implementation architecture, the structures that ensure your systems actually get used. First element: accessibility at the point of need. Your documentation can't live somewhere people have to hunt for. It needs to be embedded directly into the workflow where decisions happen. We moved our systems from static documents into our project management tools. When someone starts a task, the process is right there in the task description. No searching, no remembering, just following. Second element: accountability through tracking. We added simple confirmation steps to every system. Not bureaucracy for its own sake, but clear checkpoints that show the system was actually followed. This creates visibility. You can see immediately when someone's improvising instead of following the process. And more importantly, they know you can see it. Behavior changes fast when there's transparency. Third element: continuous reinforcement. We review our core systems in every team meeting. Not the whole manual, just one system at a time. We talk about what worked, what didn't, and what needs adjustment. This keeps the systems alive in people's minds. They're not ancient texts gathering dust. They're living tools we sharpen together every single week. And here's what happens when you create that weekly rhythm: people start building these thinking systems into their identity. It's not something they do times anymore. It's something they times or asterisk. I've watched this transformation dozens of times. Someone starts showing up every Saturday morning. At first, they're tentative, testing the waters. They contribute cautiously. But week after week, something shifts. They stop introducing themselves as just someone interested in philosophy and start saying, "I'm part of a group that thinks deeply about how to live better." That identity shift is everything. Because once these frameworks become part of who you are, they influence every decision you make, not through forced discipline, but through natural alignment. The mother who used to scroll mindlessly now asks herself, "What would my highest self do with these 15 minutes?" The entrepreneur stops chasing every shiny opportunity and filters decisions through his defined values. The teacher approaches difficult students with genuine curiosity instead of frustration, because she's internalized the practice of seeking to understand first. This is how philosophy stops being academic and becomes existential. It's woven into the fabric of who you are, and your community becomes the container that holds space for this transformation. They witness each other's evolution. They celebrate the small wins: the moment someone finally stands up to a toxic relationship, the day someone launches the project they've been afraid to start, the week someone chooses presence over productivity and actually enjoys their life. These shared victories create a collective momentum that's intoxicating. You're not just improving individually, you're rising together. And that communal energy makes the hard work of personal growth feel less like a solitary struggle and more like a collaborative adventure. Now, I want to address something that might be stirring in your mind as we approach the end of our time together. You might be thinking, "This all sounds beautiful, Ben, but I'm not a philosopher. I'm not a coach or a teacher. Who am I to lead something like this?" And that right there, that's the question that stops most people from creating something meaningful. So, let me be direct with you. You don't need credentials. You don't need a degree in philosophy or a certification in group facilitation. You don't need permission from some authority figure to gather people and explore ideas that matter. What you need is genuine curiosity and a willingness to learn alongside others. The democratization of knowledge that the internet has provided is unprecedented in human history. I lived through an information revolution myself. The printing press had been around for a few centuries, but it was during my lifetime that pamphlets, newspapers, and books became truly accessible to common people. That changed everything. Suddenly, ideas could spread like wildfire. A printer's apprentice like me could read the same philosophy as university scholars. But here's what we understood then, that seems forgotten now. Access to information isn't the same as wisdom. You can have every book in the world at your fingertips and still be a fool. What transforms information into understanding is conversation, testing ideas against other minds, defending positions you're uncertain about, and discovering flaws in arguments you thought were solid. This is why I'm so passionate about this Junto concept for your era. You're drowning in information but starving for meaningful dialogue. You have 1,000 streaming services, but nowhere to discuss what you've learned. You follow hundreds of people online, but have few genuine intellectual companions. Start with what genuinely fascinates you. Maybe you're curious about the ethics of artificial intelligence. Perhaps you're trying to understand economic systems, or questioning assumptions about education. Whatever it is, there are others near you, wondering about the same things, feeling just as isolated in their curiosity. Your first meeting doesn't need to be perfect. In fact, it probably shouldn't be. Our early Junto gatherings were awkward affairs, too formal, too rigid, people unsure of what was expected. We learned by doing. We adjusted our format based on what worked and what fell flat. The beauty of starting small is that you can experiment without pressure. Consider beginning with just 3 or 4 people. Any fewer, and you lose the dynamic tension of multiple perspectives. Any more and quieter voices get drowned out. Meet somewhere comfortable and free from distraction. We met in taverns, which worked for us, but you might prefer a quiet room in someone's home, a corner of a library, or even a park, whether the weather permits. The location matters less than the atmosphere it creates. You want a place where people feel comfortable enough to speak freely, but focused enough to listen carefully. We found that taverns provided just the right balance, informal enough that men felt at ease, public enough that we remained on our best behavior. The ambient noise of other patrons actually helped. It created a bubble of privacy while keeping us from becoming too insular. Whatever space you choose, make it consistent. Meeting in the same location builds ritual and expectation. Your mind begins to shift into the proper mode as you approach that familiar door. You associate that space with intellectual effort and honest exchange. This psychological conditioning is more valuable than you might imagine. Now, let's discuss a principle that saved the Junto from countless pointless arguments. We agreed early that the purpose of our meetings was inquiry, not victory. This distinction is crucial. When you enter a discussion seeking to win, you approach every disagreement as a battle. You defend positions you don't fully believe in simply because you've staked your pride on them. You ignore good points from others because acknowledging them feels like surrender. But when you enter seeking truth rather than triumph, the entire dynamic transforms. Now that a strong counterargument isn't a threat, it's a gift. It's helping you refine your understanding or discover where your thinking was flawed. The person who changes their mind isn't the loser of the debate. They're the winner of the evening because they leave knowing something they didn't know before. We embedded this principle into our very format by framing topics as questions rather than assertions. Instead of one member declaring, paper currency would benefit the colonies, we'd ask, would an increased paper currency benefit the colonies? This small shift in phrasing changed everything. It invited exploration rather than defense, curiosity rather than combat. I learned to phrase even my strongest convictions as tentative proposals. I imagine it to be thus, or, if I'm not mistaken. This habit, which I maintained throughout my life, wasn't false modesty. It was a recognition that certainty is the enemy of learning. The moment you become completely convinced you're right is the moment you stop looking for evidence that you might be wrong. This lesson served me well in the Constitutional Convention of 1787. Picture it. 55 men, each convinced his vision for the new nation was correct. locked in a Philadelphia summer with windows closed for secrecy. The heat was oppressive, tempers shorter still. Every regional interest, every philosophical difference threatened to tear apart what we were trying to build. I was the oldest man in that room by decades. I had arthritis that made every movement painful. I couldn't stand for long periods, so I wrote my speeches for others to read. But age had given me something youth couldn't provide: perspective. I'd seen brilliant men destroy good ideas through stubbornness. I'd watched certainty poison collaboration. When the debates reached their most bitter moments, when it seemed we might abandon the entire enterprise, I rose with considerable effort to speak. I didn't claim the Constitution we drafted was perfect. Instead, I admitted my own fallibility. I confess there are several parts of this Constitution which I do not at present approve, I said, but I am not sure I shall never approve them. I told them I'd lived long enough to see my strongest opinions proven wrong by experience. I'd been forced to change positions I once thought unshakable. And far from being ashamed of this, I'd learned to expect it. The Constitution before us might not be perfect, but it was the product of compromise, of men willing to surrender their certainties for the sake of union. I doubt whether any other convention we can obtain may be able to make a better Constitution, I concluded. Not because this one was flawless, but because the process of creation required exactly what we'd done, setting aside absolute certainty to find common ground. The Constitution was signed, not because everyone agreed it was perfect, but because enough men were willing to doubt their own infallibility. This is perhaps my most important lesson. Certainty is a luxury truth cannot afford. The moment you stop questioning yourself is the moment you stop moving toward wisdom.